Hi everyone, it's Jerry. This is a game between Wesley So and Alexei Shira from round 2 of the Sigeman tournament 2011. Let's take a look at it. We have d4, d5, c4, c6. The game pretty much enters positional waters and has white with a slight advantage throughout the whole game, and it turns out to kind of just be enough to go ahead and win, although I do question at some points during the course of the game certain choices that black ended up making, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So for right now, we just have the knights out, a Slav right now, e3, e6, and now b3, preparing to fianchetto the bishop, but not just that. This particular move, b3, is taking aim at, one of the ideas is to really prevent a certain very aggressive variation which could come about if this bishop were to immediately develop to d3. Bishop d3, we could have this exchange on c4 followed by b5, bishop back, and eventually moves like a6, maybe even a6 right now, a6, which would lend support to b5, and then c5 would be the follow-up pawn move that black would like to get in, whereas on the white end, white would be looking to now play e4 and e5, chasing this knight away, and maybe there's at some point tactics on h7. So it could be very, very dynamic. It's a very aggressive line, mirror in defense, and white just avoids it altogether by not going ahead with a routine developing type of move, but instead lending support to this pawn, and B, also preparing to fianchetto the bishop. So there's a couple meanings behind this particular pawn advance to take note of. So continuing, we have knight b to d7, a very good square in that it's going to watch over both c5 and e5, so white will kind of have to be prepared to meet maybe either one of these two pawn advances. And now bishop d3, bishop d6. You'll note that black is essentially developing their pieces to watch over this e5 square and c5 square. So bishop b2, indirectly guarding e5. We have a lot of the white pieces focusing on that e5 square and a lot of the black pieces as well. So queen e7, and now we have knight to e5, which is preventing this pawn's advancement. So I mean, if we had maybe a routine move like castling, maybe we have an exchange on the c4 square, and then after the recapture maybe e5 in this position, so which would then be threatening to land a fork on these two white pieces. So we do have another instance right here where, of course, the move order does in fact matter. Playing this knight to e5 prevents the e5 advance, opening up the center altogether. So knight e5, bishop b4 check, and knight to d2. Why was this bishop check thrown in right now? I think it could be thrown in actually a move later. This move is made so that there's not going to end up being a fork. For example, if knight takes, pawn takes, we have this fork going on, but black could always just get out of it in this instance right here, giving a check, and after the block, knight to d7. And this position right here is one which shows up, but it just comes about by a different move order. So instead of just, in other words, capturing on e5 right now, black first gives a check, white blocks, and only now captures on e5, and after the recapture, knight d7, putting pressure on this pawn. And once again, another subtle type of move in this position. White is not going for just the routine castling type of move, but instead a3. Now, what's the purpose behind this particular move? Well, what if? You know, these are questions you could, of course, be asking yourself whenever you go over a game. The reasons behind particular moves, asking probably one of the more difficult questions of yourself, which is to say why. Just really questioning particular moves. So why this a3 move instead of castle? Well, if castle in this position, maybe black could be looking to trade dark square bishops, and in fact by force black could pretty much do that, starting with bishop to a3. And these guys are going to end up having to be exchanged. I mean, there's no avoiding it. If black really wants, they could, or I should say, if white is trying to avoid the bishop exchange, you know, black could always just keep going back and forth no matter where that bishop's bishop goes, it's just constantly being attacked by the black bishop here. So a3, in summary, or just in short, a3 is preventing the bishops from being exchanged, and this is a good idea because what white has right now is a slight space advantage because of this pawn on e5 being in black's territory. That's one indication that white has a space advantage. So what do you try to do when you have a space advantage? You want to maintain more pieces on the board. So not really, or I could state it the other way. Since black has maybe less space, black would maybe want to go ahead and exchange pieces off. So this a3 move is preventing that sort of exchange right now. So don't get into the habit of just maybe wanting to go with, oh, natural developing type of moves. No. A3 has its purposes, which is to just avoid exchanges. So the bishop backs up, and only now does white castle. And after f6, we see once again a lot of the attention is still being placed on this e5 pawn. So knight, pawn, and eventually the bishop ends up putting more pressure on this point. Very critical square in this particular game. If I were to summarize it, the game kind of revolves around this e5 square for a while, and then the attention turns to what ends up happening. Well, the attention turns to the opening of the d file and who could maybe obtain control over it. So knight f3, it's really wasn't doing a whole lot from d2. It's not needed there. So f3, natural square, watches over e5. Bishop back to c7, and more pressure on that pawn, and now it cannot be maintained. There's no more support that white could lend to it, so now's the time to just capture on f6. And after the knight recaptures, you'll note that this square right now is a hole in the black position because no pawns can control that particular square. So it's a soft point in the black position, and white hops into that square right away. And in doing so, you'll note that by moving this knight right now, white can then follow up with an eventual f4 advance, which would lend even more support to e5. One other curious move is, well, something that I just kind of questioned briefly is if pawn takes pawn in this position, you'll note that the king maybe isn't going to be so safe, right? Where's it going to go if it castles? This isn't the best home, you know, having just a pawn on h7, and I don't know that the king would really want to castle queenside. So maybe there's, you know, if this capture were to have occurred, maybe we could see something like maybe just capturing on this square right away, or maybe just e4 right away, just trying to open up the position a bit when the black king is not yet castled. So that's why we're just going to be having knight captures in this position. It's going to be a much better home for the black king, of course, having two pawns on g7 and h7 if black is to castle kingside. So knight e5, black castles, f4, again, assuring, white is essentially assuring themselves that they have control over that e5 square. And this is important. The other feature behind, you know, what are the underlying themes of having control on the white end of this e5 square? Well, what that essentially implies is that if this pawn cannot advance, then this bishop isn't going to have too many prospects. You know, how can it really develop itself? We see that it ends up having to take this sort of approach, but it's a bit slow, and we'll see exactly how white ends up handling that sort of maneuver. So bishop d7, rook f3 is looking to just add one more piece to the puzzle, essentially, because we already have these two bishops bearing down against the black king side. This knight is already in close proximity to the king, and the rook, I guess, could either go to h3 or g3, and coupled with the queen even coming out to h5 at some point, this could definitely turn out to be a very aggressive attack. So let's see how black ends up reducing that sort of attack. Bishop to e8, and now queen to c2. So more pressure is being placed on h7, and it's at this point that black ends up pretty much saying, you know, okay, I'm gonna just give up a pawn, and hope that I could have some sort of activity. But we see some patient play by white, by Wesley So, and it happens the following way. So black is okay with giving up this knight for bishop exchange. After bishop takes, we have knight to e4, so white could go ahead and win a pawn in the following way. Bishop takes, pawn takes, and in this position, queen takes pawn was not played, so again, why not? What if the queen ends up taking the pawn? What would occur? We have bishop g6, queen d4, rook on f to d8 would then occur, and that's so that the queen can't go ahead and grab on a7 if the other rook made use of d8. Queen b2, and let's say bishop e4, rook back, and before you know it, what's happening here? What has just occurred with these last handful of moves? White's getting pushed around for having grabbed a pawn. So is it really worth it? Well, no, not really, because if you take into account the bishops that we have here, they're opposite color bishops, and when you get into that sort of an ending, you always do want to be aware of not allowing your opponent's bishop to activate itself. And clearly from this particular variation, if white so chooses to go ahead and grab on e4, this guy is definitely going to become active. What a great square this e4 square is. It's bearing down on g2. It's true that white has a similar thing going on here, but you'll note that black is the side who has the more active rooks in this position, and I'm not so sure that there's anything more but a draw from such a position, even though white is in fact up a pawn. So let's just retreat, or let's just back up here. So we have a little bit of patience here. There's no pawn grabbing, but instead the rook simply reacts to the threat of pawn takes rook by going back to f1. So what's really coming about as a result of this choice by white? Well, black is not going to be able to get their bishop to this e4 square. That bishop is going to still find it difficult to activate itself, and in the meantime, white is now going to be able to pretty much organize their pieces however they want, and black is in the unfortunate position such that they have to hope pretty much that the plan that white tries to undertake is not going to be a successful one, and they just have to wait it out. Black ends up having to just wait this one out, and unfortunately slips up. Let's see how that occurs. So first off, bishop g6 connecting the black rooks, and c5, a move directed at not allowing too many exchanges to occur. It's important that if in this sort of ending, if white is the side that's looking to win, and they are in this sort of setup here, you don't want to allow too many exchanges. So this move right here is putting a grip on d6 and preventing a mass exchange from occurring along the d file, namely both sets of rooks. So rook to d8, bishop d6, and we just have queen f7 and a bunch of moves here, which is turning out to be white doubling along the d file essentially. We have h3 thrown in, looking to expand with g4 to make this bishop's position uneasy, and black stops that with h5. White doubles, queen g6, opposite the white king, so already this move is now threatened. You know, that's one thing I said in a past video, that when I gave a hypothetical a while ago in one of the videos saying, if my opponent were to place their queen opposite my king and there's just a pawn in between, I'd be telling myself that pawn is pinned. Well, sure enough, there's a potential for bishop takes h3 in this position because of the pin along the g6, along the g file. So white immediately just gets out of that pin. King h7, h4, and now queen to f2. h4 was just getting ready to slip that queen in there, so queen f2 prevents any of that nonsense. And after queen to h5, we just have very calm play here. There's nothing that black can do, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure how much progress the white side can make. So this rook to d2 move, just pointing out the very technical features of this, rook to d2 allows this rook to maybe have more possibilities. You really don't want to have your rook devoted to watching over your own rook, because the queen would have pressure for as long as the white rook is to remain on the d1 square. So just bump the rook up to d2. King h7. I guess the king is just a little bit better placed on h7. And after bishop to e5, we have rook to f7, which is a move that I just kind of questioned when I saw. I did not look at this game with the computer at all, so just my rough thoughts on this particular position right here is why, or this particular move, instead of rook to f7, why not rook to d5? Maybe this is a question you could help me out with in the comments. I don't quite understand what this rook f7 move is doing. It seems a little bit better to just clog up, to not allow any white rook activity on the 7th rank. This is a hole in the white position. That rook would be firmly protected with these c6 and e6 pawns, and I don't really see how white can make much progress from this position. I did briefly look at one maybe possibility, which is to exchange and then reroute this rook to g1 followed by g4. That's really the only thing that I could come up with, but if we just were to play this out a little bit, eventually once g4 is played, pretty much you're going to need to be doing this pawn takes pawn type of move. Otherwise, white could maybe start to be controlling some light squares in the black position, and this bishop might end up not having too great of a home. So if we just had these sorts of moves coming out, I'm not saying that these are the best, but after this sort of exchange, you'll note that the black queen no longer has to be watching over the h4 pawn, and in addition to that, you'll note that as a result of not having that h4 pawn, black at least has some sort of pressure on the white position now in that of the h3 pawn. So I'm not quite sure what this would really do to improve the white position, but I just think maybe in this position, instead of rook f7, rook to d5 might have been a better way to put up more resistance. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? But how the game plays out, we have rook f7, the 7th rank invasion. Essentially, one pair of rooks comes off, and we have this sort of ending, just a pair of rooks, queen, opposite color bishops. Again, probably the most important feature to be aware of here. a4, some expansion on the queen side. Maybe eventually we'll have b4, b5. That really doesn't come into play in this game. Queen to e1. We have a lot of shuffling on the black end with these next handful of moves, but slowly white is making some progress. So while black was kind of going back and forth with their pieces, this king came over to this e1 square. Now when I saw this initially, I thought he was going to keep going, with something like this, tucking himself on a3, and then eventually maybe open things up on the queen side and mate the king somehow on h8. I don't know. Those were just my quick thoughts, but really Wesley's just taking it to this point right here so that the king has the role of watching over d1 and e2, so that at least this rook is a bit more free to move. It's not going to be needed to watch over d1, so that the queen can't slip in for that square, or on that square. So some progress has been made by white with the last handful of moves, and not so much at all for black. So bishop to e8, queen d2. Maybe this is looking to maybe just come into d6, maybe back the rook up and play to d8. Things like that. It's definitely a much more active square on d2 opposed to f2, although from f2 it is at least restraining the black queen from going too far. The black queen, for as long as the white queen remains on f2, let me just back up, for as long as this queen remains here, the black queen can't go too far. In fact, she could really just, I guess, go back and forth, but you know what, not even in this position, because now she's tied down to the defense of the bishop. So the queen is active on f2, but looking for just even more activity, it swings over to d2. Queen g6, rook b7, or rook to b8, looking to take on b7. And after queen check, we have the queen interposing. You'll note that as a result of the queen leaving the defense of the bishop, this rook is now hitting two unprotected pieces. So we now have white winning a pawn. Is this going to turn out to be enough? it turns out to be enough because not only is white up a pawn, but they have an active rook. So it's not just one feature in that of being up a pawn. We still have on the white end that rook being very active. Another pawn is bound to fall, and we see that shortly. But first things first, we do have to take care of this mate threat. The bishop and rook are, of course, converging on d1. An interesting position once again, because what we did see in the game is bishop to d6, but you could also play bishop to d4. Does this really matter? I'm not so sure that it matters a whole lot, but it does. You do want to take into account this pawn right here. If there's any sort of counterattack that black might have, it might lie in the form of white losing this g2 pawn and then this pawn being a couple steps away from winning, or excuse me, queening. So the bishop decides to go to d6, and I think for very good reason, because you do want to keep a close eye on this particular pawn right here. And sure enough, we do see that in this game. e5 is now played, looking to just break down this white pawn structure. Pawn takes, rook f7, looking to now just play to f2, gobble up the g2 pawn, and then push this pawn to become a queen. But we now have, since this bishop had blocked the black rook on this file by going to the d6 square, they could now just play, Wesley is able to just play e6, and now the bishop is hitting the only pawn that's really scary to the white side is this pawn, so it's now going to fall, and so too will the g2 pawn. So we have this exchange going on, bishop f4, and there's really nothing that I see, at least, that black can do at this point. So we have a nice little finesse here. Instead of reacting to the pawn takes bishop, king f1, just chasing the rook away from the defense of g5. Rook c2 takes on g, rook takes c, and h4, making sure that this bishop is not going to be chased around anymore. King g6 is just too little too late at this point. Passed pawns must be pushed. You look at this bishop, what a great piece. It's supported well, it's defending this pawn, it's supporting this one here, so there's no way to dislodge that bishop, chase it away. It's serving an excellent role, and unfortunately the black pieces are going to have to watch over this e8 square, and pretty much how it turns out is black ends up running out of moves. So king f5, rook b8, rook to e5. What a terrible position for black to have to be in, to devote two of their pieces to just watch over a single pawn from queening. So rook check, king g4, any other move would block one of these two pieces, it would basically just get in the way of one of those two highlighted pieces, and the pawn would be able to queen. King here, pawn push, and king to g6, once again pawn push. So the only choice, unfortunately, is king to g4, and after king to g2, we just have black resigning, and for good reason, because what is there to do? We have a mate threat here. Rook to f5, again the pawn pushes to queen. Bishop g6, we could just have check. King h5, king g3, taking away g4, and there's no way to prevent this rook from coming to f8, which would have two threats in mind, coming to either e8, or excuse me, not going to e8, but a supporting pawn to e8 equals queen, and also just threatening to come over to h8 to give check and then win material, because the bishop would be having to block on h7. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it. Take care.